Have you ever had a test where you got asked the question, what is more true? For example, which of the following is more true? A horse is a large animal. B, an elephant is a large animal. Or C, a whale is a large animal. It's true that all of these animals are large animals, but the answer is C, because it's more true. We can even put this to the test. Let me show you what I mean. Have you ever seen a scale like this one? You put something on either side of it, and whatever is heavier always goes to the bottom. So same question. Which of the following is more true? A, books are heavy. They are. Goodness. Or B, a cinder block is heavy. Yeah. It's true that a cinder block is heavy, but it's also true that books are heavy. But since the cinder block went to the bottom, we can see that it is heavier. So the statement, a cinder block is heavy, would be more true. So we can have several things that are true at the same time, but only one that is more true. We saw this with Moses in our story today. When God talked to Moses from the burning bush, all that Moses could see were the problems in his own life. Moses knew that God wanted to use him, but all that he could think about were his past mistakes and insecurities. He thought about all the reasons why God shouldn't use him. In fact, the first thing that he says to God after God tells Moses that he wants to use him is, "Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt?" What Moses is dealing with here is a feeling of not being good enough. This is a feeling that we have all probably felt at one point or another. And this feeling can really weigh us down. I'm sure he thought about his speech problems as well. Now, we don't exactly know if it was a stutter or some other sort of speech impediment, but we do know that he was insecure about it. Many of us deal with this same thing. Maybe not speech problems, but maybe there's something that you're insecure about, you're self-conscious about it, and that insecurity really weighs you down. I'm sure Moses also thought about his past mistakes. Moses was a murderer. He killed an Egyptian when he was still living in Egypt. He probably thought, God could never use someone like me. I'm a sinner. Ugh. Maybe you've thought the same thing before. Maybe you think of all the times that you've sinned or mess up, and you think to yourself, God could never use someone like me. I'm just a sinner. And it begins to weigh you down. And all of these thoughts that Moses was struggling with were true. He was a sinner, a murderer. He did have speech problems. It was hard for him to speak. He wasn't good enough to free the Israelites on his own. But this is what I want you to see. God called him anyway. All of these thoughts that Moses was dealing with were working to keep him from becoming the person that God called him to be. But he didn't let it stop him. He looked to God and he trusted in what God said about him, and he followed the steps that God told him to take. And if we're not careful, we will let these same thoughts keep us from becoming who God calls us to be. So how do we stop ourselves from getting so focused on these true issues in our lives that keep us from becoming who God calls us to be? We have to shift our focus. That's what we have to do. Whereas before, we were focused on all of our problems and all the things that may be true in our lives, we need to shift our focus and look to Jesus and what he says about us in God's word. In John 14:6, Jesus says, "I am the way, the truth, and the life." Jesus is always more true. Most true. What he says is always more true than anything else that may be in our life. And his word outweighs every problem that we may be facing. So we need to stop looking at what might be true in our life and start looking at what is most true. What Jesus says. You may feel insecure, but Psalm 139:14 says that you are wonderfully made. You may not feel good enough, but 2 Corinthians 12:9 says God's power is strongest when you are weak. You may have been a slave to sin, but when you become a part of God's family, Jesus sets you free. And John 8:36 says that if the Son sets you free, talking about Jesus, that you will be free indeed. What he says, what God's word says, is always most true. So take time each day to remind yourself that you are who Jesus says you are. Say this after me. Every day, I am who Jesus says I am. When we take our focus off of the issues and put it on Jesus and what he says, it frees us. Your problems won't magically disappear, but you don't have to let them bother you and keep you down because you know something that is more true and you're focused on what Jesus says. Now, you're free to be the person God made you to be because you look at what is most true. So what is it for you? What is it that's holding you back? I encourage you to talk with your parents or your small group leader about what that is. Then, find what Jesus says about you that is more true than your situation.